So welcome also to our brothers and sisters online. It's good to have you with us here tonight. Oh, good. Okay, good. All right, where was I? Yes, January 2020, which some of you will remember just over 2 years ago, is a really important time. It was just before the whole COVID thing kicked off, wasn't it? It was really a big, and we didn't have a clue, did we, in January 2020, what it was all going to be like. At that time, I was in the foothills of the Himalayas. I was in Darjeeling, which is famous for its tea. Beautiful, clear blue sky, where I was looking out at various mountain peaks, Lhotse, Kanchenjunga, and of course Mount Everest. I could see Mount Everest very clearly in the background. The temperature was around about freezing. So I had every available piece of clothing that I had with me, because I was on a teaching tour in India. And one day, me and two friends, we decided to take a jeep ride outside of Darjeeling to a little town called Goom. And it's got a very famous monastery in Goom. And back in the 1960s, the abbot of the monastery was a famous teacher called Dhardo Rinpoche, and he was one of the teachers of my own teacher, Sangha. So it felt a little bit like a pilgrimage, something like that. Anyway, we went to see this massive Tibetan monastery in Goom, you know, with the mountains in the background, clear blue sky, very beautiful experience. And it's called the Yiga Choling Monastery. It's been there for about 147 years. And it's very majestic, decorated in the Tibetan style. And just as we arrived, ready to go into the main temple, a monk, a red-robed monk, was banging this enormous drum, boom, boom, that was kind of resonating through the valleys. And that was just the bell for lunch, for the monks to go to lunch. So it meant that we had the whole of the temple to ourselves. So yeah, it's the Gelug school, which was the yellow hats, which is the school of the Dalai Lama. So the main meditation hall was enormous, rich and decorated, full of symbols and very, very beautiful, with an enormous 15-foot high Buddha right in the center of it. Incense smoke was curling up. Butter lamps were sort of flickering away all around the temple. A really particular atmosphere. But what I particularly noticed about this silent, empty meditation hall was the atmosphere. The atmosphere was quite extraordinary, something I'd never really experienced before in quite the same way. So it was deeply meditative. The atmosphere was really rich with meditation. It was so rich that I got a notebook out and I wrote some words down in a little notebook while I was in there. And this is what I wrote. I wrote, deep peace, sanctuary, calm, concentrated, healing, loving and warm, electricity, refreshment. So I felt a kind of toxic mix, a rich mix, a potent mix, I should say, of all those qualities as I walked into this particular shrine room. It was really quite extraordinary. And I wasn't imagining it because my friends felt it as well in the same way. I have felt these kind of atmospheres before in meditation centers, retreat centers, sometimes in Buddhist pilgrimage sites. I've felt them, but this is probably the deepest that I've ever felt. And well, as I say, the monastery's been there for 147 years. And tens of thousands of meditators have spent vast amount of time in that meditation hall, just like we do in this hall and other halls within the Buddhist center. So I think something had really built up within that meditation hall. So maybe in 100 years from now, our meditation halls here at the Cambridge Buddhist Center will feel the same kind of potent meditative mix. Let's hope so. So the atmosphere was of a quality I would describe as dhyanic. Dhyanic. I'll explain that word in a minute. A deep, creative, rich mental state. So that's the subject of my talk, dhyana. So my talk on dhyana comes at the end of, towards the end of a long series we've been doing since the beginning of the year on an important Buddhist text called the Bodhicaryavatara. So, which means the way to Bodhi, the way to enlightenment. So I've got a little flip chart here. So I've got a few things written on it. So that's the word there, the Bodhicaryavatara. It's quite long, isn't it? By the way, that's the monastery there. A little drawing of the monastery. So, yeah. So Kanchenjunga, Mount Everest in the background, and a really beautiful kind of monastery is there. It's a wonderful place to be. So yes, we've been studying this great text, which was written in the 8th century by a monk called Shantideva. And yeah, so we've been studying many, many aspects of that in this series. So at this stage of the series, we're looking at it in terms of what's called the 6 paramitars, or perfections of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the ideal Buddhist, if you like. And he or she exhibits energy, has the quality of generosity, of ethical behavior, patience, wisdom, and meditation. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about meditation tonight. So last week, Arthur Priya gave us a talk on virya paramita, energy in pursuit of the good. And so tonight I'll talk about dhyana paramita. And the relevant chapter in the Bodhicaryavatara, there's the Bodhicaryavatara for you. That's what it's like. You can buy it in the bookshop. There it is. The relevant chapter is called the perfection of meditative absorption. Okay. So the word dhyana, what does it mean? It simply means meditation. That's all it means. Just the kind of meditation that you've been doing, that we do here at the Buddhist Center. That's simply what the word means. However, within the Buddhist tradition, it has also become a word that's used to describe very, very absorbed meditation, quite profound meditation of someone who's become deeply absorbed in his or her practice. And so it's slightly confusing. It means meditation generally, and it also means this sort of super conscious form of meditation, which is available to anyone who's willing to put the time in and create the right conditions with meditation. You can experience those states. There's 4 of these super conscious states, and they've got an ascending order of subtlety. But I'm not going to really talk about that tonight. I'm going to cover what Shantideva says in chapter 8 of the Bodhicaryavatara about meditation. And he approaches meditation in quite a traditional Buddhist way. What he does is he splits up meditation, all kinds of Buddhist meditation, into these 2 categories. The first one's called shamatha, and the other one's called vipassana. And what we do here at the Cambridge Buddhist Center is shamatha meditation. And that's the meditation that stabilizes you, that unifies you, calms you down, and also brightens and deepens your mind. That's the meditation. Whereas vipassana is also known as insight meditation, so, or sometimes clear vision. That means the kind of meditation where you're really looking deeply at what the world, what reality really is. But don't worry if you don't understand all that, because I'll be going into it in a few moments. This kind of meditation that we have here is also available in Triratna, this insight meditation, but you've got to have trained for many years in this kind of meditation, in the Shamitan Meditation. And usually you've got to be an order member as well before you can do it. But we've got both kinds of meditation within Triratna. But everybody practices Shamitan meditation. So Shantideva starts the chapter by going into Shamitan meditation, and he is instructing us on what we need to do to be successful in Shamitan meditation. You know, the mindfulness of breathing, the metta bhavana, as you've been doing. If you really want to go more deeply into that, you need a couple of conditions. He talks about that. And these conditions are called internal and external Viveka. Viveka is one of these nice Buddhist words, which you'll get used to. And it means something like solitude or solitariness or being away from everyone else and what everyone else is doing. Yeah. Sometimes it's rendered as separateness or isolation or detachment, which sounds a bit extreme. I don't think it's quite as extreme as that. Okay. But it's definitely solitude. That's what Viveka means. And there's two kinds. And the first kind of Viveka is called external Viveka. And that means if you really want to go deeper in meditation, you need to get away from all your usual life, the things that concern you, your everyday life with all its demands, its anxieties, its concerns, its conflicting priorities. You need to get away from that for a period of time into a meditative environment. And I just need to have a little drink. Okay. It always happens in about this stage in a talk, I get a bit dry. Okay. Yeah, if you want to be, if you want your meditation to go deeper than it ordinarily does at home or in a class, you need to get away on retreat from all, usually in the countryside. But coming to a class is really good. So that's why we do classes, is because you can leave your home and all that's going on there, and you can focus on a period of practice here. But also we need some, Shantideva says we need some internal Viveka as well, solitude. We need to distance our mind, yeah, from the usual preoccupations and distractions. And at least for the period of the meditation, you need to try and put them aside, the things that you're thinking about. You're trying to meditate and you're thinking about work, you're reorganizing your department at work in your mind. It's not going to work. You're not going to get very far with Shamitan meditation. It just won't happen. It's interesting that Shantideva actually goes to the trouble of listing 4 kinds of things we really must not be concerned with when we're trying to meditate. And one of them is our attachment to people. Doesn't really go into a lot of detail about that, but we can imagine what that is. He says our usual sensory pleasures, the things we get pleasure from, is trying to just leave that aside for the period of time. Our concern for our possessions. Gosh, that's a big one, isn't it? Don't forget, he's talking in the 8th century here as well. So, you know, we're just the same now, aren't we? And the 4th one is our concern for our financial security. So that really covers a lot, doesn't it? That's an awful lot of stuff. You really need to set that aside for the period of the meditation. And if you're going on the retreat, for the period of the retreat that you're on as well. I can remember my very first week-long retreat that I went on when I was 24. That's 39 years ago, by the way. I remember finishing up work on a Friday quite early and leaving my partner and young son at the time and getting a train to the Norfolk countryside and being quite, finding it quite a wrench. You know, I was leaving my family for a whole week and I really felt the wrench of it. Gosh, you know, it felt quite kind of thing. And I remember arriving at the retreat center and it seemed a bit like a kind of a youth hostel or an outward bound center or something like that, in that everything was very plain. All the retreatants were sleeping in bunk beds. The food was vegetarian. There was no TV or music. It was all very, very kind of plain and ordinary. And I didn't really like it. And the other things I found out that the first meditation was starting at 7 o'clock the following morning. And I didn't like the sound of that. I remember being quite shocked at how attached I felt to my normal home life. But as the week progressed, I got really deeply into my mind, my meditation. There's a simple program of meditation, group discussion, ritual, and country walks. I made some new deep friends, people who are still my friends all these years later. And I came away inspired and enriched, actually, and I really hadn't expected it to be quite like that at all. So I think going on retreat for the first time can be a bit of a big deal, actually. You can really feel it, when you go. But if you stay with it and don't bottle out, I think you will really gain so much with your practice. You'll really go deeper into Shamitan meditation. That's what Shantideva is recommending in the 8th century, and it's still true today. It's exactly the same for us today. Of course, we do have internal Viveka within our daily lives at home. If we've got into a regular practice of meditation, you've got Viveka going on there because you've got a little corner of your house, you've got room for meditation somewhere that you can go and do that for a period of time. You are away from people to some extent, and you're able to have that kind of solitude to yourself. But from time to time, if you really want to go seriously into shamatha, you need to get away for a period of time and have that kind of experience, because it will enrich the rest of your life, your ordinary life, what you're doing. You'll find that enrichment you get on a retreat will enrich your ordinary everyday life. He even recommends complete solitude. And when you're quite an experienced meditator, you can actually go on what's called a solitary retreat, where you literally are on your own for a few weeks in a log cabin or a caravan or a cottage or something like that. I've just recently come back from 3 weeks doing that, and I absolutely loved it. I had lots of long walks, and I was able to do a lot of meditation and just be with myself, and it was really very, very beautiful indeed. Now, 39 years ago, I'd have seen something like that as like solitary confinement. I'd seen it as some sort of punishment, but it wasn't like that at all. It's not like that because I've had more experience and I'm able to go much more deeply into it. So yeah, you can trust Shantideva on this one. He's not recommending that we live like that all the time, but he's saying periods like this will definitely benefit your meditation practice. I've also been teaching meditation a lot in the last 18 years in India. If anybody's been to India, you'll know that it's very, very crowded indeed. Some of the cities that I've been teaching in, like Mumbai, Nagpur, Pune, they're mega cities. Millions and millions of people all crammed into. And I've been working amongst the slums, teaching people meditation, where they can't get away from other people. They're absolutely rammed on top of each other. I'm currently working in Calcutta at the moment, and it's one of the world's most densely packed cities. But people do it. They find a way of getting some space for themselves to practice meditation because they really value it. And we do also have beautiful retreat centres in the countryside in India where people love to go and go on retreat and get away from it all. Shantideva, by the way, is a very experienced practitioner. He's obviously a Bodhisattva, though he never claims that he is. A Bodhisattva, is, as I say, an ideal Buddhist, a realised Buddhist. But he does like to comment on the people around him in 8th century India. Just normal society. He comments on that sometimes in the Bodhicaryavatara. Some of it's quite challenging. This is what he says. Here we go, here's a little example. Deluded by sensory desire, people sell themselves into slavery, spending their whole lives working for others, collapsing each evening, exhausted by a hard day's work. They get much pain, and little enjoyment, like a beast that gets to chew a bit of grass while pulling a wagon. They spend their youth earning money. In this way, they waste this precious opportunity. They could gain Buddhahood with a fraction of the effort. Doesn't sound that different from today, does it? As he goes on to say, so we should avoid sensual desire and cultivate delight in detachment and solitude. We should join the fortunate ones who pace slowly over pleasant, flat rock surfaces, spacious as palaces, under the cool rays of the moon, caressed by gentle forest breezes, meditating for the well-being of others, passing the time as they please, free of care, not tied down by anything. They taste the joy and contentment that is hard to find, even for a king. So, on my very first retreat, I did get a little bit of an experience of that, and on lots of subsequent retreats soon. And I know that a lot of you have experienced that as well. So Shantideva does also go on to talk about vipassana, and he does this in quite an unusual way, not in the way that you would normally expect him to do that. The subject of insight, spiritual insight in Buddhism is a huge topic, much bigger than I've got time for this evening. It's an enormous topic, but I need to cover something tonight. And one of the approaches that people often take to insight meditation is a bit wrong, really. It often happens. People tend to think of insight in Buddhism as a kind of cognitive thing, something that you think about, that you philosophize over. And it can all get a bit dry, and all get a bit nihilistic. We talk about annihilating the self, destroying one's ego, that kind of stuff. It can all get very, very dry. And that's a bit of a cul-de-sac that people can go down unless they have a bit of guidance with insight meditation. So you can get sidetracked into a labyrinth of philosophical thinking. But the real thing, the real traditional approach to insight meditation is where you meditate upon the beauty, the wisdom and compassion of a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition, and their qualities. That's one aspect of it. There's another aspect where you reflect and meditate deeply on the challenging but liberating reflection of the impermanence of everything, the insubstantiality of everything, and the unsatisfactoriness of everything, absolutely everything. This is very much a traditional approach, and it's very effective, actually. It's not a cul-de-sac. That really works. Surprisingly, Shantideva doesn't do that in the Bodhicaryavatara, which is what you would expect him to do. But he takes instead, what does he do? He takes us through a long series of reflections regarding what he calls exchange of self and other. Exchange of self and other. The non-separation between ourselves and other beings in the world around us. He talks a lot about altruism, concern for others. He wants to engage our hearts as well as our heads. So this is what he says. Just as I love and cherish my body, which is divided into many limbs, so I should love and cherish this whole world, which is divided into many beings. So he wants us to really go deep into all this. He wants us as individuals to put others, to go into other people's shoes and to really walk around in them. So if we're doing the metta bhavana practice, he wants us to really live that metta bhavana practice out in our everyday lives, not just in our meditation. He wants us to really do it. He wants us to feel for and identify with other beings in the human race, who he says are exactly as we are. in the Essentials. And he calls this the supreme mystery. The supreme mystery. This is what he says. Whoever longs to quickly save themselves and others should practice this supreme mystery, exchanging self for others. All the suffering in the world comes from obsession with ourselves. All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. Why say more? The fool looks out for his own benefit. The sage acts for the benefit of all. Just look at the difference between them. So what does all this mean? What does this all mean to us? It can seem like an impossibly high ideal that he's talking about. And it is quite a high ideal actually. But it is also reality. It's also how the world really is. We really are deeply interconnected with each other. We're not separate. And we've started to get a bit of a sense of that in the last 2 years. We really started to see how interconnected the whole world is. So in Buddhism it's called the Bodhisattva Ideal. And what Shantideva is doing is he's giving us an insight into the mind of the Bodhisattva, which is quite different from the mind that we usually inhabit. Yeah, because our own minds are deeply structured in a different way. And I'm going to say a bit more about this in a minute before I finish. And what Shantideva and the Buddha before him are saying is that we're deeply, deeply interconnected in this world. It's not like we normally see the world. So to illustrate this more clearly than I'm able to do, I'm going to quote one of the poets, the English poets, Shelley. Here we go. In Shelley's Defence of Poetry, this is what he says. The great secret of morals is love, or a going out of our nature, and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful, which exists in thought, action or person not our own. A man to be greatly good must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own. So that's Shelley. And it's a beautiful passage. And it perfectly encapsulates the Bodhisattva Ideal, what Shantideva is talking about. But once again, what does this actually really mean for us in our lives? And in a way, it's easier to say what it isn't than what it actually is. So I'm going to have a little go, and then we'll finish. So in human life, we create boundaries, don't we? There's us as individuals, and we've got our little world. And that little world might include a partner, children, family, if you've got one, friends, colleagues, projects. That's you. That's your little world. And everybody else's world is sort of out there somewhere. And that's the extent of your boundary. Within the Sangha, the boundary is a bit wider than that, actually. Things are a bit more free-flowing, you'll find, in the Sangha. But in ordinary life, you've got some people who've got quite wide boundaries, actually, and other people who their boundaries are absolutely tiny. They're just right around themselves, and that's it. And you'll notice that if you meet people who are always talking about themselves. They're not at all interested in anything you've got to say. You're just there to listen to them talking about themselves. There's a quote by the great writer Oscar Wilde who said, "A bore is someone who insists on talking about themselves when you want to talk about yourself." And it's true, isn't it? It's true. That's how we can get. We get so caught up in ourselves, don't we? That's what happens. Yeah. So in the case of the Bodhisattva, that just isn't there at all. The concern for others, the concern for themselves, is the same thing. It's radically different from what we experience. But as we grow as meditators and Dharma practitioners, we can become more like that. We can extend our boundaries. They don't kind of just become defined in that normal kind of way. we'll get less satisfaction out of just doing things just for ourselves. We'll get more satisfaction from being involved in helping others, working for others through charity work, Dharma work, like we're doing, teaching meditation. Things will change and expand for us in different ways. Yeah, I was just thinking about my granddaughter recently. My granddaughter's 3, and she's a delightful kid and loves spending time with me and playing with me. She particularly enjoys playing Lego with me. And but every now and again I'll pick up one of her toys and she'll get very upset. I remember I picked up a teddy bear and immediately she got hold of it, snatched it off me and said, "Mine, mine, my teddy bear." And I wasn't allowed to. I can play with lots of her toys, but I can't play with the teddy bears. So it develops quite early, this sense of me and mine, and things become quite boundary. It's quite natural. It's kind of how the world works, isn't it? But, well, within this particular practice of Vipassana, Shantideva is giving us methods and practices and reflections for changing that, expanding that, and seeing things in a different way. So much I could say on this subject. Yeah, but that'll have to do for the moment. As I say, it's a very big subject and a very big practice within Buddhism. But I hope that I've kind of evoked something for you, given you a bit of a glimpse of the practice, the approach that Shantideva's taken to insight meditation. And more broadly, his approach to dana paramita. So this is what he says. Those who have developed the mind in this way, who feel joy in releasing others, they are the ones who are truly fulfilled. What is the point in some cold liberation just for oneself alone? So this approach to others, it does require imagination. Yeah, you need to develop your imagination so that you can exchange self and other. Yeah, you have to imagine other people's lives really richly and vividly and fully, and not just be concerned with your own fixed sense of self. So as I say, I think COVID has actually had, of all the terrible things that have happened with COVID, there's been some good things as well, because people are starting to think about other people in other parts of the world. Even I've noticed with all the floods and storms and trouble that we've had lately, people are thinking and talking about it more. What it's like for people in Wales at the moment, and with all the floods, people can empathise a bit more than they normally would. And I think this is a very good development. Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. I don't know how I'm doing for time. How much time have I got? I'm all right, am I? Yeah, okay. I'll tell you a little story which illustrates how it can break down and how good it is when it breaks down. A few years ago, I was working in a Buddhist centre and someone had died, a Buddhist, and I didn't know her. And we got a call from her relatives who said, "We're looking for a Buddhist minister to take a Buddhist funeral at the crematorium. Have you got one?" And leaving a phone number and an address. So I rang them up, said, "Look, I'll do that for you, no problem, free of charge," and went round to the house. And there was the sister of the deceased and the brother were there. And they looked quite shocked and irritated when I turned up at the house. And they said, "What are you doing here? Look, what are you doing? We're waiting for someone at the moment. There's a minister calling for us. Who are you?" I said, "I am the minister." And she said, oh. And she was just really, really shocked. So I don't know what she thought a Buddhist minister would look like or what it was, but it was quite icy. Eventually I was allowed to come into the house. And anyway, we worked out an order of service and all the rest of it, and it kind of went all right. Anyway, we went to the crematorium a week, and I led the service. A lot of people came. This woman was much loved in her particular Buddhist tradition and appreciated. It went really well. At the end of the service, we all went off for a meal, and the woman came over. She rushed over to me. She said, "Oh, Saddharaja, I must apologise to you. I was so rude and cold to you. That was a wonderful service. I'm so grateful." She said, "Do you think it'd be all right if I could give you a hug?" And it was really, it was really moving. It was really lovely. And so initially there was this hard boundary, you don't look like a Buddhist minister to me, sort of thing. But then the whole thing just completely broke down. How much better it was when that had happened, It was a lovely experience. So, the Bodhisattva, he or she, is very active. Is very active in this regard. But at the same time, they're quiet and still and experience solitude. So quiet and solitude and exchanging self and other. So I'll leave you with a final reading by Sangha, who is my teacher. And here we go, and I'll be finished. This is one of the reasons I am a Buddhist. I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it is possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly and deeply believe. This belief is part of my own experience. It is part of my own life. It is part of me. I cannot live without this belief, and I would rather die than give it up. Okay, thank you.